Hello, everyone. Welcome back to week 8 of the Sports Lock podcast. Hopefully, you guys enjoyed your weekend and won in your fantasy leagues and hopefully made some money. I'm your host, Ben Mostaller, and tonight we will talk about week 8 of the NFL as I do weekly NFL predictions, sports bets, daily fantasy, and start sit. So, anything related to that, I got you covered. I put the homework in. So, all you have to do is listen and win some money, hopefully. I just want to say that I am going to be going live every Wednesday, 9:30 Eastern time on TikTok. That is the Beast Benny Cakes. I have to use that account until I rack up a big following on the Sports Luck podcast page. So make sure to like and follow both of those TikToks, the Beast Benny Cakes and Sports Lock podcast. But I will be going live on the Beast Benny Cakes account every Wednesday, 9:30 Eastern time. And I will be answering live any specific fantasy football questions or sports betting questions that you may have. So if you're debating between two guys to start sit, maybe you have a trade on the table, anything like that, you can ask me and I will answer all questions. So make sure you check that out. But before we move on to week 8, of course, we've got to take a look back at week 7. And predictions were 9-5, the same as back in week 6. The spread, we were 7-7, so just average. But the over and under, we almost nailed 11-3, perfect there. And it seems like I've been doing really well with the over unders this year. And I think I got to bet that a little bit more. Our locks, best so far at 3-1. We've yet to have a perfect lock. The only one to fail us was Atlanta covering, which was the first time they haven't done so this season so far. So that's all right, though. We move on to week 8, and hopefully we can get perfect locks, even though it looks like there's a lot of tough games to call. How about our week 7 daily fantasy results? It's a really good lineup. What we did last week was paid up at the running back spot, and we paid down at tight end and defense, of course, in order to get there. So we go with Derek Carr, who was average. He had 241 yards, but only one touchdown, 15th overall in week 7 amongst quarterbacks, 13.5 fantasy points. But that's all right. We had Austin Eckler, who was first overall. He only had 31 rushes, but he did add a rushing touchdown and 12 receptions for 96 yards and a touchdown. He has been utilized big time in the passing game, and he might break a record for running backs for the most receptions the way that he's going now. We also went with Saquon Barkley, who didn't do as good as we paid for. He got 13th overall, but he added 110 yards on the ground, 4 receptions for 25 yards. If he would have found the end zone, that would have been a lot better. But Ken Walker doing it again for us, and he has been the last 2 weeks, 28.8 fantasy points, third, right behind Austin Eckler and Josh Jacobs. He went for 168 yards and 2 touchdowns. Just phenomenal. Or he's had 2 touchdowns in the last 2 weeks. Or he did have 2 touchdowns. Sorry that I don't have the stats correct there. But anyways, Ken Walker looking really good. He's been the number 2 running back, I believe, or the number 3 running back in the last 2 weeks. Now, our wide receivers, they just did okay. They could have done a lot better. But we had T. Higgins, 5 receptions, 93 yards. Alan Lazard, 6 receptions, 55 yards. And Rondale Moore was the biggest disappointment. But we didn't pay too much for him at only 1 reception and 31 yards. But how about getting Cade Otton, the lowest we've ever paid for a guy? I believe he's 2,700 around there, and he still produced 10.4 fantasy points. It was 10th best among tight ends. That is great value there, and that's what you're looking for if you're paying down for a guy. And then the Panthers defense, they pretty much shut out the Buccaneers. 8 fantasy points, not bad there. They were in the top 10 last week, and again, we got them for a low price. So if you use this lineup that I told you to, that would have been 144.8 fantasy points. Obviously, it could have been a lot higher, but I believe this was our second highest or highest total yet. So we are doing well nailing those. Very proud of the week 7 start sit results. First of all, it could have again been better with Derek Carr, but the sit for Jared Goff was on point, and he finished 29th amongst quarterbacks in week 7, coming off a bye, going up against the tough defense. I projected it, but he ranked last among starting tight ends or quarterbacks this past week. 228 yards, 2 interceptions. Starting Ezekiel Elliott was very smart. In the week prior, he went off big and he goes for 2 rushing touchdowns in week 7, finishing running back 12. And the sit for Clyde Edwards-Helaire was fantastic. Now, I made the podcast prior to knowing that he wasn't going to be the starter, only 90.2 fantasy points. He was able to find the end zone, but only 32 yards. Start Alan Lazard, again, not the greatest, 31st. He had 11.5 fantasy points. However, Amari Cooper was a great call there, only 10.4 fantasy points, and he has been terrible on the road. That's why we put him there. He ranked 39th overall out of wide receivers in week 7, only 3 receptions for 74 yards. And as far as the tight end spot, said to start Evan Ingram. He finished in the top 10 in fantasy in week 7, 4 receptions, 67 yards, going up against his former team. And the sit of Cole Kmet was pretty good. He ranked 25th overall in week 7, 5.2 fantasy points, 2 receptions for 32 yards. So now we can move past week 7, and we're always looking ahead to see where we can win some money and hopefully predict this as accurate as we can, the games of week 8. But I found this to be one of the toughest weeks. And the locks, though, I still feel confident in. I could have went 5 locks here, and I'll tell you in a little bit which one I was debating but didn't call a lock. Anyways, on Thursday Night Football, we have the Baltimore Ravens at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Tampa Bay coming off a very disappointing loss against the Carolina Panthers. Baltimore coming after a win against the Cleveland Browns at home. So Baltimore is favored by 1.5 points. I'm going to take that in Tampa Bay until Tampa Bay can get that offense going. I just think that that's going to be an issue. I do think they hit the under, though. Both teams have pretty decent defenses, so I don't think there'll be too many points put up. So 45 is a little bit too high for me. I'd play the under, but Baltimore to win and to cover that 1.5. We are back over in London with the Denver Broncos and the Jacksonville Jaguars. The Broncos come in as 3-point underdogs to the Jaguars, and I would take the Jaguars to cover that 3. Denver has been really struggling offensively. Their defense, though, looks pretty decent, struggling to win games that they should. The Jacksonville Jaguars just came up short against the New York Giants, who look really good this year, only with 1 loss. So I think Jacksonville does bounce back, -3, but I'd play under 39.5. The Jaguars win this one. Carolina plus 4.5 at the Atlanta Falcons. Again, Carolina just shocking people, beating the Tampa Bay Buccaneers last week. The Atlanta Falcons coming in to the game with a disappointing loss to the Cincinnati Bengals. I'm locking this one in, the over of 42. Last week, Carolina proved, even without Christian McCaffrey and Robbie Anderson, that they can still put up points. Chuba Hubbard and Deontay Foreman both looked very good in the running back spot. You still have DJ Moore, and it looks like they're going with Phillip Walker to continue at quarterback no matter who comes back. So with that being said, and with the ability of Mariota to find the end zone a lot, and the Atlanta Falcons being able to put up some points, I'm going to go over 42. I think 42 is just a little bit too low. I'm locking that in. They both have been, able to get into the 20s each, which is where I see this game being, such as a 24-21 game, with the Atlanta Falcons winning, but Carolina covering that 4.5. I think that's the safest play here, is to have them covered, because I think it's going to be a close game, and I think that they could potentially win the game. So Carolina plus 4.5 is a good play here. Chicago at Dallas. The Chicago Bears with a impressive win on the road on Monday night against the New England Patriots. Dallas coming off a nice victory with Dak back against the Lions. The Chicago Bears will pose a better defense. With that being said, I think they covered the 9.5 points as the underdog, but Dallas does pull out the victory. I think 9.5 is just way too high. I know Dallas has a better defense than the New England Patriots, but I still think that Chicago just got something to click up there in New England and can carry that into this game on Sunday. I'd play over 43.5 because of that, but it's very close to that line for me. Miami at Detroit, it's simple as this. Detroit just looks awful right now. The defense did step up a little bit against the Dallas Cowboys, but I think Miami is going to torch them. I like them -3 and to win the game, and I'm playing over 50.5 because Detroit was one of the best offenses in the league. The last two games looked bad. Miami's defense should give them a little bit of life at home in Detroit. But I am going to go with Miami -3 and potentially to win by more than that. Arizona +3.5 at the Minnesota Vikings. The Vikings are coming off a bye, so they are refreshed. Arizona picking up a win on Thursday night football against the Saints, so they had a little bit more time off. Over under a 49, I'm going to play under just slightly because I think that, both teams getting a little bit of time off will kind of come out of the gate slow. And 49 is pretty high. I'm taking Minnesota cover, though, the 3.5. They're at home. They are off the bye. And I just think that they are a better overall team than the Arizona Cardinals. So give me Minnesota -3.5. The Raiders are going to the New Orleans Saints this coming week. The Raiders with an impressive win over the Texans. They looked like the Raiders that you want to root for. At the Saints coming off a loss against the Arizona Cardinals. So they're a little bit more refreshed. We'll see if they have some of their wide receivers back. Michael Thomas and Jarvis Landry have been out the last few weeks. So it's been the Chris Olave show, but still having trouble getting the job done. So this one I've tossed back and forth. But I'm going to go with the Raiders -2. I just really like how they played at home against the Texans in week 7. I think that continues. And with the running game of Josh Jacobs, it's pretty much unstoppable. That's why Derek Carr really didn't have as great numbers passing because Josh Jacobs got the job done. So if they need the pass, they have it, but they can rely on one of the best fantasy running backs this year, Josh Jacobs. So give me the Raiders -2. Over under 48. I do think there's points put up on the board, so I'm going to play the over. Now, this game, I thought about locking in the Jets because I think that they will beat the Patriots at home after the Patriots looked terrible. And the Jets are actually -1.5 underdogs in this one at home. So that entices me more to take the Jets +1.5. So if you want to lock it in, lock it. I'm going to kind of consider it a lock, but I'm not including it in my 4 locks. It's a bet that I'll be playing. Under 41.5 that I like, but the Jets just look really good this year. Going into Denver against that defense and pulling out a win. The Patriots have kind of been all over the board. They look good one day and bad the other. I know Mac Jones isn't the answer, but Chicago pulled away on Monday night from that game. I think the Jets are a much better team than Chicago. So giving them at +1.5. The lock for me is going to be the Keystone State rivalry between the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Philadelphia Eagles. The Steelers, they just cannot get any offense going. The line looks terrible. They're not calling the right calls. The defense is getting winded. So Philadelphia is coming fresh off the bye, and Pittsburgh just struggles playing in Philadelphia in general. So I think Philadelphia blows this one out, kind of like the Buffalo game against Pittsburgh. So I love locking in Philadelphia -10.5 at home. And over under, I'm going to play over 43.5 because I think that's a little bit too low. Philadelphia will put up some points. Pittsburgh will not. So I think it'll be like a 30-14 type game. My next lock is Tennessee at Houston. I'm shocked that Tennessee is only 2-point favorites on the road against that Texas team who looked awful last week. Tennessee defeated the Colts at home and looked really good coming off the bye. So I think that continues going into week 8. So I love Tennessee -2. I would play over 40.5 because that's a little bit too low. Washington and Indianapolis. Right now, the Commanders are +3 on the road, but I am taking that, and I'm also taking them to win. The Commanders looked really good against the Packers. The Packers have been struggling, but the Colts, they've looked iffy week in and week out. and they are going with Sam Ellinger. They're benching Matt Ryan. So with the change in quarterback and just they need some time to get used to the team there. Sam does. So I like Washington to come in and kind of pull up an upset in Indianapolis. I am going to play under 40.5. San Francisco at the LA Rams. The Rams are plus 1.5 underdogs at home. I am locking that in as my fourth lock. The Rams coming off the bye, they're going to be refreshed. The Niners have been looking kind of iffy lately. So give me the Rams plus 1.5 at home. I think that's an absolute lock. And under 41 because it is a divisional rivalry game. And the 49ers have struggled, and the Rams might struggle coming out of the bye just a little bit to put up points. Next, we have the Giants at the Seahawks, another very tough game to call. Right now, Seattle is 3-point favorites at home against the one-loss New York Giants. But right now, the Seattle Seahawks surprisingly are leading that NFC West division. The over-under is at 45. I'm going to go over because both teams just have okay defenses, so I think there can be points put up on the board. Ultimately, I'm going to go with Seattle to win, but the Giants to cover that +3. I just think that's a safe play to go with this one because I could see the Giants winning. Plus, you're getting +3 there. So give me the Seattle Seahawks to win a close one, but the Giants +3 is probably the safest play in this game if you're betting it to play. Green Bay plus 10.5 at the Buffalo Bills. This is the biggest amount of points that Aaron Rodgers has ever been an underdog for. It's never reached double digits, and it is this week at Buffalo. I think it hits over 47.5 because Buffalo is going to be coming fresh off the bye, but they will come out of the gate strong because they're just a great team. They've had time to rest. The Green Bay Packers just look terrible. So I like Buffalo to win this one and Green Bay to continue to fall. And finally, on Monday Night Football, we have the Cincinnati Bengals 3.5-point favorites on the road against the Cleveland Browns. I do like Cincinnati to win and cover the 3.5. Their offense has been exploding. Joe Burrow looks fantastic, and I think that's going to help them push back the Browns in this one to cover the 3.5. Over under, I have slightly over 47.5 just because the Browns, they can put up some points too. So I do seeing it be like a 28-20 game. That'll get you barely over that over. But those are the predictions for the week, and hopefully we can get a big win in week 8. Of course, now we go to daily fantasy, and this is kind of how I go. If you haven't watched my videos or looked at my predictions, what I do is I always in daily fantasy kind of try to find a quarterback that will get you the job done for a low price. And I also try to pay low on tight ends, my wide receiver 3 or 4, and defense. That way you can pay up for top wide receivers and running backs. And this week looked very nice, in my opinion. We're going to start with Danny Dimes, Daniel Jones this week at only 5,700. He put up 31.8 fantasy points last week and is going up against the Seattle Seahawks defense, which is allowing a lot of quarterbacks to put up good fantasy points. Herbert threw all over him last week. Love him at that price. We're not paying too much there. That allows us again to pay up for running backs, and we are going to pay Josh Jacobs 7,500. What a steal he is for that. He has averaged 35 fantasy points in his last 3 games. I'm going to ride that till it stops. I'm riding that train all the way, and I'm going to get that value out of him against the New Orleans Saints. We are then going to continue to ride the Ken Walker train. We have the last 2 weeks. He's got the job done. So let's do it again in the 3rd week. Now his price is getting a little bit higher for his value, but he has a favorable matchup against the Giants defense, averaging 22 carries in his last 2 games, and will get over 100 yards and 1 to 2 touchdowns in this game, no doubt. Lastly, for the running backs, we will go ride the hot train of Ramondre Stevenson for 6,400. He has averaged 23 fantasy points in his last 3 games and also has a touchdown in each of those games. So I just think that he's going to be utilized against that Jets defense. And Between all of these guys, you should look to get at least 70 to 80 fantasy points just between those three. Now, for wide receiver, again, we're going to pay some money, but well worth it. DeAndre Hopkins coming back off of the suspension last week. He looked phenomenal, 10 receptions in his first game. And it's clear that Murray's going to get him the ball and find him. So, what great value for him in week 8. And we are going to ride that. We're also going to go with Jalen Waddle, struggling a little bit late. He's been kind of all around, but he's got a favorable matchup this week against the Lions defense, who just look god awful. They're the worst defense in the NFL. So I see him finding the end zone in this one. He hasn't found it since week 2. So if you did an anytime touchdown score, make sure you have Jalen Waddle including in that in week 8. For our wide receiver, again, we got to pay down for a guy. So this time we're going to go with Ben Skoranek of the Los Angeles Rams. Why are we going with him? Well, he's been averaging over double-digit fantasy points in his last 2 games. And you got to look for a guy that has that volume, especially if you're only paying $4,100 for him. So give me some Ben Skoranek for the Rams against their rival 49ers in week 8. For the tight end, again, we pay down. We're going to go with Noah Fant at only 2,800. I think that's a steal at only 2,800. If Metcalf misses time, which it looks like he will with a knee injury that he left the game with last week, Fant will get more receptions. So if he can get you your 10 fantasy points, that would be fantastic for this coming week. And finally, we are going to take the Buffalo Bills defense, who's one of the best in the league. They got the Green Bay Packers coming into town, and the Packers look awful. Bad teams have been putting up points against them. So I think that, and their offense has been struggling. So I think the Bills for 2,900 is an absolute steal. And lastly, we do our week 8 start sits. And I'm going to start Tua Tagovailoa this week against the the Lions defense. It's as simple as that. They're the worst defense in the NFL right now, so take that all day. I'm going to sit Aaron Rodgers versus the Bills. We're paying up for the Bills defense. I think Aaron Rodgers will struggle as he's been of late. I like the start of Ramondre Stevenson. Again, we're going to ride that train until it slows down. I like the matchup against the Jets. But I'm going to sit Najee Harris. He just hasn't been, getting the looks, the touches because of the poor offensive line play. This week he goes up against an Eagles defense that's a very top-notch defense. So I would sit him, even though you might have used him as a first-round draft pick. You still got to sit the guy. At wide receiver start, we're going Tyler Lockett of the Seattle Seahawks. The same reason we said Noah Fant might get some receptions up because of Metcalf possibly missing time due to injury. Tyler Lockett is Geno Smith's guy, so he's going to go to him more because of that injury. So love Tyler Lockett this week and a favorable matchup against the Giants defense. I'm going to sit Hunter Renfrow. It's very tough to pick a sit this week, kind of a start this week too. I think there's some pretty good close matchups, but why I'm sitting Renfrow is it looks like Darren Waller could come back this week from injury. Mac Hollins has been stepping up and caught a touchdown last week as kind of a 2-3 type wide receiver. With that being said, it's going to hurt Hunter Renfrow going into New Orleans this week, so I would sit him. I'm going to start Mike Gesicki. He is going up against the bad Lions defense, so if Tua is going to succeed, so will Mike Gesicki, a guy who's kind of been iffy this year, but this week should pose a big week for him. And I'm going to say Hayden Hurst, a guy that I've liked a lot, and it was a sleeper for mine at the beginning of the season, doing well with Cincinnati. I think that the Browns defense will take care of him. They were able to take care of Mark Andrews for no catches last week, who was one of the best tight ends in the league. Tyler Boyd has stepped up and has taken a lot of receptions. So on Monday Night Football, I think that Hayden Hurst would be a sit for me. But that is it, guys. Thank you guys for listening in. Make sure to subscribe, like, share this video, and check out all my other videos. I go on TikTok live every Wednesday at 9:30. You can find that on the Beast Benny Cakes account over on TikTok, but also follow the TikTok of this podcast, the Sports Lock podcast over there. And on Instagram, we are on Sports Lock Podcast. And when a podcast is, released, it'll also be shown over on Instagram of where to find it. But of course, if you subscribe to the channel, you'll get notified when a new video is posted. So I want to thank you guys for listening, and I want to wish you the best of luck this coming week of week 8 of the NFL. Let's get some wins this week and come back happy in week 9. Have a good one.